Pedro was the crown prince of Portugal in the year 1339. The only son left to the king of Portugal, Pedro dutifully agreed to marry Constanza de Peñafiel, a princess of Castile. A year after her marriage to Pedro, Constanza sent for her young friend, Inez de Castro, also from Castile. Inez became Constanza's lady-in-waiting. When Pedro met Inez, he was smitten the moment he laid eyes on the blonde-haired beauty. Inez could not help but notice she had gained the eye of the prince. It flattered her. She hid it from him, for she would not jeopardize her relationship with Constanza. She avoided the prince. He looked for some way to speak to her in private. If, he thought, he could tell her of his feelings for her, perhaps she would feel the same way. Finally, one day, as the royal party hunted in the countryside, he was able to speak to Inez alone. "Do you give me some little thought?" he asked her. She hesitated, then said, "Yes." "Can you love me?" "I do love you, but my loyalty is with my mistress." "Am I not your lord?" he asked. "You are." He drew close to her and said in her ear, "I would only be lord of your heart. Though it pains me, I ask for nothing else." Not long after, they became lovers, as their pain was too great and their longing for each other overwhelmed. In 1345, Constanza died giving birth to her third child. Pedro did not mourn her. Before the princess turned cold in her grave, Pedro asked his father for permission to marry Inez. The king denied Pedro his wish. Instead, the king searched for other wives for his son, princesses from Spain or France or England. Anyone but Inez. Pedro declared that he would have none other than Inez. He would marry only the one love of his life. The years passed. Inez bore 3 children. Still, the king would not relent. He told Inez that he would kill her and her children if she would not break off the relationship with his son. Inez begged the king to spare his own grandchildren, and then she left the palace to take refuge in a convent in Coimbra. "We will bide our time, my love," Pedro said to her. "My father will not live forever. When I am king, I shall marry you, make you my queen." Inez kissed Pedro and said, "It shall be as you say." "I shall love you until the end of the world, Inez." Pedro knelt at her feet, took wine and drank it. He then offered the cup to her, and she too pledged her life to him until the end of the world. The king grew tired of his son's disobedience. Pedro again made the case for marriage to Inez, but the king would not hear it. He was afraid of Inez's family since they had ties to the royal house of Portugal. The king then decided to rid himself of the problem by having Inez murdered. In the year 1355, in the city of Coimbra, as Inez walked with her youngest child in the convent garden, 3 men sent by the king murdered her. She was 29 years of age. When Pedro heard the news, his heart broke. His grief then turned to outrage. He went to war with his father. He lost. But the king, old and sick, died a year later. Pedro became king. Now he would have his revenge. He sent spies to find the 3 men who had killed Inez. They were arrested and returned to Lisbon. As Pedro dined, the men were brought before him. "You ripped out my heart when you murdered Inez," he told them. "I will return the favor." And so Pedro did by having the men executed, by having their hearts ripped out. With his vengeance satisfied, Pedro next exhumed Inez's body from where it was buried. Legend has it that she was sat upon a throne, crowned queen, and the entire court made to kneel at her feet and to kiss her dead hand. She is my wife. We were married. To prove the truth of his statement, Inez was reburied in the royal tombs in the church at Alcobaça. Her sarcophagus bears her effigy, and that effigy wears a crown. Pedro is buried in a sarcophagus just like Inez's. His effigy faces hers, so that when the resurrection trumpets sound and the dead rise up, the first person Pedro will see is Inez, and Inez will see Pedro.